Okay, I'm recording.
Very nice.
I reckon we're going to start this video straight from the beginning, or we're going to do it for like a professional
I think
intro.
let's just start from here, honestly. I'm tired.
Okay.
Okay, but
Video. Okay, what are people going to see in this video? What is it all about?
we are talking about the Foxeer T-Rex line of cameras. I say the line.
There's two of them, isn't there?
There's two. There's the Micro and the Mini. I originally wanted the Mini for the Apex, but I still wanted the Micros anyway for another project. And ended up throwing it in the Apex, been flying that for about 3 or 4 weeks, been really, really happy with it for Acro. And then I sort of just got thinking, how would it be for racing, right?
Well, surprisingly, I actually had questions about people asking how is it for racing, and I wasn't even going to do what we're about to do here and show a comparison of the two.
Yeah, I think the thing with us was that characteristically higher TVL cameras tend to be pretty high latency. And so even from like when we got right into FPV, the higher TVL cameras were always worse by a noticeable margin. So it was just always you go lower TVL for the lower latency, feels better, flies nicer, right? But you have a look at the latency. It is like a 50% difference if you look at the numbers, right? 4 milliseconds to 6 milliseconds on the Predator versus the T-Rex. But realistically, 2 milliseconds is pretty tiny. So it sort of does beg the question, does the higher resolution...
Thomas is hearing crows at the moment. I'm not sure whether they
they're
came
not
through or
going to
not.
get picked up.
Hopefully they shouldn't, because we've done this a few times. We were talking about cars doing burnouts.
I mean, you haven't heard any of it?
You couldn't hear it, so I don't know whether it's on the mic or not. I haven't got the audio levels on here, so I can't even tell.
Okay, well anyway, so you got a low latency setup, a high latency setup, but the high latency one does have noticeably sharper video, or should have noticeably sharper video.
When setting them up, that's where I was actually blown away by it. Like looking at because I usually set them up with a little LCD screen, and basically switch off all the the text it has built into it.
Yeah.
I switch all those off,
amazing.
set it to NTSC, etc. Now, surprisingly, looking at what I could see in the room, the level of detail was actually really impressive.
It's a lot less
They're
blocky,
a really
right?
good camera, aren't they?
They're really good, yeah. So today what we're going to be doing is taking it out on the track to try it. This is not what it's intended to be used for, but I mean, it's a camera. Why not find out what
The
it
idea here
can
is
do?
just to present the information more than anything else, rather than say which is the right or the wrong camera. But yeah, so your plan is at the moment you're going to fly a few packs with each?
Yeah, so what I've done already, I just came off flying my normal race drone with the Predator V5. This is a same exact race setup. This is actually a main fleet setup. All I've done is switch the camera out to the T-Rex. You did all the setup, got the camera tilt right and all of that. I guess we should quickly cover another difference too that I didn't notice initially, is the T-Rex actually has a different lens.
Yes.
So I use 1.7mm lenses, and this is a different 1.7 from what you get on the V5. It's a lot bigger, presumably lets in a lot more light.
Well, it looks like a really good camera. I'm interested to see how this actually goes, whether it is actually usable for racing. I'm not sure whether you would or wouldn't, but anyway, it's just going to be interesting to see what the video quality is actually like. And then what we'll do later on is actually discuss what it's like with the...
For Acro?
For Acro, yeah, flying in the park and all that, and probably share some of the footage with that while you actually go over that.
So, we're in the Googles. Shall we take off?
Yes, we shall.
Clear?
Yeah, clear.
Okay. So the first thing I noticed, which is the same thing I found when I first switched the Apex to this camera, is it looks both sharper and less sharper at the same time. What I mean by that is, I think with the Predator it's almost a bit blocky. This isn't blocky, like the pixels are a lot smaller that you're seeing. But also, I guess it's the way the colors are handled, or maybe the sharpness settings on the camera out of the box. You sort of don't get like a sharp contrast between, like say, the edge of the gates and the background. Well, now I'm this close, it does look perfectly fine. So I don't know, maybe I'm talking crap, but
maybe what we'll do is actually have a comparison video up to at the end of this.
Yeah, hopefully that'll
and you
make
can sort of see the difference between running the analog versus, not analog, digital, running the Predator versus the T-Rex, and see exactly what it looks like.
Yeah, one really big difference is the detail on the ground. And this is where I think probably that lens is making a massive difference, and the higher detail, the higher resolution. is you can really pick apart different greens from other greens. You can see real contrast in the ground. That's all sort of how you tell where there's scraggly branches, and just sort of be able to see ahead.
And that is what it's designed for, isn't it?
Yeah.
Now, it's actually worth mentioning that when I was actually focusing it, I usually point out and focus it towards the trees out past the track. With the Predators, I basically focus, get everything as sharp as I can in the outline, but I don't get much detail with the trees that are in the distance. With this, I could actually see detail in the trees in the distance. In terms of just the different, the dynamic range, you know what I mean?
Facing this way.
Darker bit, yeah. The darker bits, the brighter bits, I could actually see detail in there. So,
Yeah. Now, interestingly, the field of view does look a bit different. I guess that's just the lens being a different distance away from the sensor, and it being a different lens, the way it sort of warps the image is a bit different from the Predator. Not bad, just a different experience. I think I can feel the latency. It's honestly barely noticeable. Like, everything just feels, when I'm doing like little roll inputs, it feels a little like less crisp, which would sort of make sense if things are happening a little bit later. On the Apex, I didn't really notice it, but also the Apex is significantly heavier with a GoPro and everything. So there's a lot more momentum in that system.
there's latency because of momentum.
Yes.
So that you can't really tune out, can you?
Yeah, but honestly, this isn't that bad. I'm just going to go ahead and say it. While I do think I'll end up preferring the Predator at the end of the day, like I'm going to keep running back-to-back flights, there are some events, like say, you know DR1,
Yeah.
where you're flying at gates that are like a kilometre away, and there's tons of different rock formations, and it's just really hard to pull detail out of an image.
This is where this would come into it, isn't it?
Yeah, for race. I mean, for the slight latency penalty, you've got a hell of a lot more detail. And honestly, the latency penalty isn't that bad. I could see why, and there's been a couple guys at our local clubs that have started switching to these for racing. And I can really see why, because for the slight latency penalty, you do get a lot more detail for your money. Okay, so what we're gonna do now is keep running back-to-back packs with the two quads for the rest of the day. We'll have a look at that, see if we can pull any like general consistency trends, see if there's anything interesting there. Once again, it's not the original purpose for the T-Rex, but it is performing surprisingly well, so why not test it? We're here anyway.
So at this point, what I'll do is put up a side-by-side comparison, and then we'll come back to
Our thoughts.
our thoughts. Okay, so you did multiple packs after pack. How many flights did you do? A lot.
I did a lot, but
And they were all back to back, weren't they?
they're all back to back.
As in swapping from one to the next and vice versa.
Yeah, which, I mean, you might think, okay, you never really get fully settled with one, which is true, but I also think it does help for really picking the differences between things. Data collection is a really difficult thing, and working out what you like and don't like. It's a real feel thing as much as it is an actual data thing. And we'll get to that too with especially this track. I did really struggle with at pace. So I definitely wasn't as consistent as I am normally. The data will reflect that when you have a look at it. But I think it still does give an indication as to where these cameras might be good.
I mean, irrespective, the reason we did this test, one of the questions was, can you actually fly it on a race drone? I think we've answered that question.
Oh, 100% yes.
We may not be able to definitely say which is the better of the two. I think I still like the Predator for track.
I'm leaning towards the Predator. We'll put the basic results
But
up
it's
here.
also dependent on the track and where you're actually racing. Where some, like, I think you were thinking, what was it?
For DR1, 100% I go for a Predator. Actually, okay, I've got the perfect description. For an event like this, or a scenario like this, like say your normal club racing, where
high contrast tracks.
the Predator is definitely, yeah. I mean, you look, just overall, I was lower averages. My actual fastest laps were really close between them. I was only a fraction quicker with the normal Predator, And it was on my last pack where I knew basically I had to try and get something back. So there's a bit of a bias there, right? But the total fastest laps, basically you can count them as the same. I was, though, more consistent on a lap per lap basis with the Predator still. And I think that's coming down to the lower latency, a little bit of being just more comfortable with the camera. You know, I've been using the Predator line for however many years now, so I'm pretty comfortable with it.
Isn't it?
Yeah. But I do think probably it is the latency playing a bit of a component. Also, it looks like that real razor sharp sharpening they have on the Predator was using some of those real big switchback moves. Switchback. I see what Evan did there finally. That took me a little bit to get. Anyway, when you're doing those, like, say, slalomy sections and stuff, with the high movement, the really high contrast and the sharpness of the Predator makes it easier to spot, like, flags and stuff when you're doing those quick movements. Whereas on the quicker movements, I found things tends to blend in a little bit on the T-Rex. Having said that, the actual raw detail was better. And so once I got used to calibrating myself to the sort of picture detail versus the color detail, which even then isn't a strictly accurate thing, because the T-Rex picking apart different colors from each other, like more subtleties, was actually easier. It was more like the big differences of like a white and a black or something. It's just sort of a bit more faded.
You have less dynamic range with the Predator, so as a result, things tend to pop, but you also lose finer detail.
That's what it is. Yes, finer detail you've lost with the Predator. That is perfect. Yeah, and that ties in really well. I know I haven't finished the race portion, but that ties in really well to why I love the T-Rex so much for freestyle, which I didn't even realize how much I liked it until I was demonstrating a race quad to a group of friends in the place where I was filming. And I was like, wait, why can't I see as well as I could before? And it's basically that really fine detail where you're looking at different shades of browns and greens. You're looking for little scraggles.
Twigs and things, like slight variations in just dynamic range, color changes, that's all.
Yeah, all that stuff, the T-Rex really comes into its own. And also, I will say, I mean, we're not testing it here.
So wait a sec.
I feel like the lower light performance of the T-Rex is better.
Okay.
Because of bigger lens, I think. That's my theory.
So would you say for freestyle, I mean, I know this is going to be very subjective, so we're not going to, it's not going to be 100%, but would you say for freestyle, definitely the T-Rex?
Yeah, I'd say so. I'm definitely going to be using the T-Rex for my freestyle cinematic stuff. I love it because of the really high detail you get, but it's still the reliability of Analogue. Especially for 5-inch, where I still feel like latency really matters. It's just, I mean, even here, I think you could feel it with the race quad. When you were traveling at that pace, you could sort of start to tell a latency difference, but because it's consistent, you sort of just work around it. It's not really such a big hindrance. So definitely when you're on Acro, man, you're just flying in a park, I think I would easily go for the T-Rex. And even then in some race scenarios where maybe, like, the turkey race, the WDC.
Yep.
There, because you've got the grey of the ground and then the white of the gates, which is sort of a funny tan.
So it's not an environment like this where you got green grass and white flags that just pop.
Yeah, whereas
you've got sort of greys and whites which are kind of blending in together, harder to see.
Yeah, I honestly think in an event like that, even where it is still a pretty controlled environment, I'd be tempted to take the T-Rex over the Predator, which, I mean, that's kind of surprising for me. I don't think that's what Foxeer intended, but it is just...
It's a good camera. There's no two ways about it. I mean, the other things we haven't tested, which you probably need to keep in mind, we haven't tested it with LEDs, under lights, all those sorts of things. But having said that, look, it's a good camera. No two ways about it, isn't it?
Yeah, if you're using an analog system right now and you're looking for a little bit more detail and are okay to take a really tiny latency penalty, it is consistent latency too, it's not variable, then...
And you've still got the higher quality, as in...
It's a noticeable game.
More lines of resolution.
More lines of resolution.
Better contrast
I would
ratio.
argue that at certain ranges there would be areas where this might just outdo a digital system for detail, because digital systems tend to pixelate. Not the DJI FPV combo, I don't know what the deal is with that thing, it seems to have infinity range. But for the normal air unit, if you're comparing to that, I'd say for 5-inch I'd honestly, I mean, I was already picking Analogue over anyway. This is my preference for freestyle, but... Like, even from a detail standpoint, I like the fact you don't lose.
You've got the footage that you did with Ruben, where you're doing chase footage, air to air. We could probably roll that in here now anyway.
Yeah. There was an interesting thing I noticed about that.
Yep.
It was harder to pick the quad from a distance because it was such a small black blob in the sky.
Yes.
But once I was locked onto it, there was so much more information there to work with. So it's a real interesting, the differences between the cameras are vast in some ways and really subtle in others, where there's some areas you'd expect the T-Rex to be better and it isn't quite, and there's areas where you'd expect the Predator to really outperform the T-Rex and it just doesn't. It's a fascinating thing. I think that's something we've probably got to look a bit more into, to be honest. There's a whole different field there to cover.
This whole investigation can go on for absolutely ages.
Yeah, but I guess keeping it simple, T-Rex, high detail, touch more latency, but I'd say most of the time it isn't really noticeable unless you're,
It's still a low latency camera. There's no two ways about it.
It's a really low latency camera. The higher contrast of the Predator is really, really nice when you're racing, doing really quick movements. It just helps you to quickly grab, oh, this blob of color is something, right?
It's a flag, it's a gate or whatever.
But then those finer details are easier to pick out with the T-Rex. I think that's it. The lenses are different. Keep that in mind if you're going from one to the other.
I suppose then I wouldn't mind hearing what other people's thoughts are. You've got the videos here, you can look at them side by side, see what you think.
And even people that have used both, what are your thoughts? I know there's some people in our club that have changed to the T-Rex and they're just preferring it full stop. It's a real interesting dynamic between the two cameras because they are both so good. There's a bit of overlap, obviously, but then there are also some areas where one just seems to peak out the other one. So, quick summary is the T-Rex definitely has better detail. The latency is higher from a standpoint that's noticeable at the very limit, but only
it's still
barely.
A low latency camera.
Yeah, I mean, you can look at the fastest laps. They were basically the same, and I was a little bit more consistent with the Predator in this environment, but that's something you could probably get used to.
Look, you've got a lot of footage to look at here. Hopefully you can make heads or tails out of it. I suppose leave your comments down below. Thoughts, which one did you think was better?
Yeah. Which one do you think is better? And if you've actually bought one,
yep.
What do you think?
Your feedback, yep.
It's all handy. It's all good.
Thanks very much, guys.
See ya.